For nearly 50 years, Harold and Evelyn Mercer had grown old together on their quiet farm, never suspecting what the storm uncovered. An ancient oak had been torn from the earth. Beneath its tangled roots lay a perfect circle of stones, buried under decades of mud and vines. They cleared the earth and found a well, older than the farmhouse, moss-covered, and black enough to swallow the afternoon light. But the rope hanging from the wooden beam was clean, new. Harold leaned over the edge and searched for the bottom. There was none, only darkness. Then, far below, water rippled where no light could reach. Evelyn whispered, "How can water be that deep?" The wind stopped. Every leaf went still. Without either of them touching it, the new rope began to sway. Tomorrow they would lower a bucket. The next morning, Harold and Evelyn returned with a bucket. The rope slipped downward effortlessly, as if someone in the darkness were guiding it. When Harold pulled it back, the bucket was full. The water shimmered with tiny silver lights and smelled sweeter than spring rain. "One sip won't hurt," Harold said. He drank, and the pain vanished from his knees. His back straightened. His cloudy eyes became sharp. Evelyn watched the man she loved grow 30 years younger. Harold sprinted across the distant field, laughing like he had forgotten his age. Then Evelyn drank. The stiffness left her hands. Her wrinkles softened, and for the first time in decades, she moved without pain. They danced beneath the afternoon sun, believing they had stolen back time. Neither noticed the empty bucket filling itself behind them. Every morning, Harold and Evelyn returned to the well. Each drink made them stronger, quicker, and more certain the miracle belonged to them. Harold repaired fences in hours. Evelyn gardened until sunset. When a neighbor noticed, they said they were eating better. But soon, one drink each morning was not enough. By afternoon their mouths were dry, and every thought bent back toward the silver water. They carried the little bucket home, then returned before bed for one more taste. The well no longer felt discovered. It felt necessary. The first day Harold tried to wait, the old pain returned twice as sharp. His hands shook until another swallow made them steady. That night, Harold dreamed of the rope lowering itself. From far below, something whispered, "Come back, drink, there is more." The first change seemed harmless. A thin crack split Harold's thumbnail. Then Evelyn found silver-brown hair collecting in her brush. Their faces looked younger, but their skin became delicate, smooth, pale, and almost transparent in the morning light. Far from the well, Harold brushed a rose bush. His sleeve caught, and the skin beneath opened like wet paper. Evelyn wrapped his arm in silence. By night the wound was gone, healed by another drink. But the new skin looked thinner than before, with every blue vein showing underneath. Evelyn began wearing gloves because buttoning her sweater hurt her fingertips. Harold stopped looking at his hands unless he had to. Still they drank, because whenever they promised to stop, the thirst arrived, and suddenly neither could imagine living without the well. Then the watchers appeared. At first they stood at the edge of the woods, tall, still shapes that vanished whenever Harold looked directly at them. Evelyn began seeing strangers inside the farmhouse. An old woman in the hall, a little boy near the fireplace, a man beyond the bedroom glass. None of them blinked, none moved, and each was gone the instant she turned on a light or called Harold's name. One evening Harold finally whispered, "Do you see them too?" Evelyn nodded, and neither pretended they were alone again. They locked every door and sat awake together until midnight, listening to soft footsteps cross rooms that remained visibly empty. Then, far across the dark field, wood creaked. The well's spindle began turning, and the little bucket lowered itself into the darkness. Desperate for answers, Harold searched county records. Every family that had owned the farm after its first settlers had vanished without explanation. In the attic, Evelyn found a loose floorboard. Beneath it lay a weathered journal wrapped in cloth and darkened by a century of dust. The final pages warned that the water did not restore youth. It stole tomorrow, borrowing years that had not happened yet. Every drink spent part of the life they were still meant to live. Eventually, the writer said, there would be nothing left to borrow. Across the last page, one sentence had been written with a shaking hand. Do not let it convince you to drink again. Outside, the clean rope tightened around the oak spindle. It creaked once, slowly, as if the well knew they had learned its name. They decided to stop. Within 24 hours, the miracle began to unravel, and every ache returned stronger than it had been before. Wrinkles deepened by the hour. Their hair loosened in handfuls. Harold's eyesight blurred, and Evelyn could barely cross the bedroom. By afternoon they looked older than the years they had lost, frail, hollow-eyed, and exhausted by the simple work of breathing. Then the whispers became screams. Thousands of voices pressed through the farmhouse walls, pleading, warning, and calling them back to the water. Harold covered his ears. Evelyn gripped his sleeve. The sound did not come from outside. It seemed to rise through the floorboards. The well was no longer inviting them. It was feeding on every tomorrow they had borrowed and demanding the rest. Determined to destroy the well, Harold tied a safety rope around his waist, while Evelyn anchored the other end beside the stone rim. He climbed down past damp stones that continued farther than the earth should allow. With every foot, memories of youth returned more clearly. At last, his lantern reached the bottom. There was no underground spring, only countless skeletons stacked in silence, each holding an empty bucket. At their center lay a pool of silver light. Above it floated the remaining years, stolen from everyone who had ever taken a drink. One shape looked exactly like Harold, only impossibly old. It smiled with sorrow and spoke in Harold's own voice. You already drank your future. Above him, Evelyn felt Harold's safety rope pull tight as he began climbing toward the light. Harold climbed out screaming and begged Evelyn never to touch the water again. She promised, but the curse had already finished counting. Their watches stopped. The farmhouse clock froze. Across the field, birds hung motionless as the world became still. Only Harold and Evelyn could move. Wind stopped in the grass. Falling leaves waited above the ground. Even the sun seemed trapped. Evelyn tried to imagine tomorrow and found nothing. Not darkness or death, only an empty place where the next day should be. Harold could not imagine it either. The well had taken every remaining morning, meal, and word they were meant to share. When time finally moved again, they understood the cost. They had not become young. They had only spent their final days in advance. That evening, Harold and Evelyn sat on the porch overlooking the farm they had built together across nearly 50 years. The sunset burned orange across the fields. Neither cried. For a long while, neither needed to speak. At last, Evelyn took Harold's paper-thin hand. I thought the water gave us more time. Harold gently closed his fingers around hers. It only made us forget how precious the time we already had was. Together, they watched the final light leave the field. Far across the field, earth and creeping vines covered the well. By sunrise, Harold and Evelyn were gone, their chairs facing the morning. Years later, after another storm, a stranger crossed the abandoned field. Beneath the fallen oak's roots, the same stones waited, and the clean rope began to sway.